Hello there. When something is new and gets very popular, and I mean very popular, it is bound to have imitators that try to replicate the new and popular thing. Take Jaws, which was released in 1975. Jaws changed everything. Jaws changed the way that movies were made, changed the way that movies were advertised, changed the way how movies were shown. Jaws is widely regarded as the first modern blockbuster. And it's true. Jaws changed everything. The modern blockbuster scene is the way that it is now. Well, not right now. For better or for worse, is because of Jaws. The same with Star Wars, released in 1977. Star Wars is released, and every subsequent movie wants to be Star Wars. This is most evident in the James Bond film Moonraker, which was released 2 years after Star Wars, and sends Roger Moore's Bond to space. Bond had never gone to space before. Not every movie wants to necessarily be space movies, but they definitely want Star Wars a success. The same with Toy Story. Toy Story was the first ever completely CGI animated film, and traditional animation was eventually phased out in favor of computers in a misguided attempt to replicate Toy Story's financial, critical, and audience success. The same with The Lord of the Rings. J.R.R. Tolkien pretty much changed what fantasy was. It's not so much that subsequent fantasy writers inevitably draw inspiration from Tolkien, it's more that Tolkien created the modern fantasy genre. And of course, there's the Marvel Cinematic Universe, especially after the success of the Avengers. All of the preceding MCU movies did well, but it was the Avengers' success that made every studio executive say, okay, we have to create a shared universe thingy too, and none of them ever came close to matching Marvel's success. So it only makes sense that after Game of Thrones got huge, that it would get its own imitators too. Today I'll be reviewing the first season of Black Sails. Now, when I say that this series is Game of Thrones with pirates, that is an observation, not a criticism. Game of Thrones with pirates is a sound premise, and I can easily see this turning out good. So why is it not? Since Black Sails was made in an attempt to match Game of Thrones' success, let's first see what it does right. The sex. Game of Thrones did have a lot of nude scenes and sex scenes, especially in the earlier seasons. That's basically all that Black Sails gets right in copying Game of Thrones. It doesn't get a lot else right. Anyway, with Michael Bay as an executive producer, Black Sails is a historical drama which also serves as a prequel to the novel Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Okay, those are your first 2 mistakes. First, Michael Bay. Second, a prequel to Treasure Island. So Black Sails wants to be a prequel to, as well as the deconstruction of Treasure Island. I've never read Treasure Island. I have seen the Disney adaptation Treasure Planet, but if you're going to deconstruct Treasure Island, why not do it directly? Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire weren't deconstructions of one particular fantasy story, nor were they a prequel to anything. Game of Thrones wasn't a prequel to The Lord of the Rings, it was a deconstruction of the entire fantasy genre. So, if Black Sails is going to be Game of Thrones with pirates, it would have to deconstruct common tropes in pirate stories. It would have to show how pirates lived, what they ate, injuries that were common amongst the crew, what they did during the day, the politics on the ship amongst the crew, how loot was distributed. We get very little of that in Black Cells. Black Cells just thinks that it can give us boobs and blood and we'll get something of the same quality as Game of Thrones. Another failing of Black Cells is its lack of interesting locations. Game of Thrones had a wide array of interesting and different locations that we were always cutting around. So much of Black Cells takes place on a single island where nothing interesting is happening. Game of Thrones had these richly developed three-dimensional characters. The characters in Black Cells are developed up to a point, but they quickly grow stale as they're stuck in storylines that just go nowhere, and when they actually do go somewhere, they've lost you because everything surrounding it is boring. Another failing of Black Cells is its attempts to be somewhat historical, which indicates another misunderstanding of Game of Thrones, which was purely fantasy. We have a very brief cameo of Blackbeard, who's just a really fat lady, and Blackbeard apparently refers to her pubic hair. We never see her again after her cameo in the very first episode, and this scene is never mentioned again. What the fuck was going on there? What was that about? Big-lipped alligator moment much. Another strange bit of historiosity is the inclusion of Anne Bonny. I don't know a whole lot about the history of pirates, but I do know about Anne Bonny, who was a female pirate that disguised herself as a man, but the way that they handle her is odd. She dresses like most of the other male pirates, but aside from that she makes little effort to disguise her gender, which might just be artistic license, because the actress is quite attractive. But eventually we learned that she's just being herself around everyone, so I guess that if you don't know who Anne Bonny was, this won't bug you, but for me, I just found this odd. None of these historiosities serve Black Cells. Game of Thrones was not historical fiction. Game of Thrones used historical analogues to deconstruct fantasy. The Targaryen's practice of matrimonial incest was taken from ancient Egyptian pharaohs. The knights in Game of Thrones were mostly portrayed as cruel, much like the Crusaders. War shown in Game of Thrones is quite realistic. If Black Cells wanted to do this, it would have to tell a subversive pirate story that used historical analogues. Not only is Black Cells not doing that, it also wants to be a prequel to one of the most foundational pirate stories that there is, that there was, or that there ever will be. That's why Black Cells doesn't work, because it's confused. It wants to have its cake and eat it too. It wants to be subversive without actually subverting anything. I will spend a minute complimenting the actors. Luke Arnold portrays a young, Long John Silver, and initially it seemed like he'd be our main character, but isn't. But I think that's because Black Cells wants to be an ensemble. I also think that he was cast because he looks a little bit like Kit Harington, who portrayed Jon Snow on Game of Thrones. Toby Stephens portrays Captain Flint, and he's not great, but he has nothing to work with. Anna New's character probably receives the most development, but it's so clumsy. Jessica Parker Kennedy takes off her clothes. Tom Hooper is an actor who was actually on Game of Thrones. Zach McGowan is probably the best thing about Black Cells. He's not necessarily a great character, but he has a rugged charisma that goes a long way. It's from my understanding Black Cells got better the further it went on, so maybe I'll watch the later seasons. But I can say with certainty that Black Cells Season 1 is a miss.